Project Wolf Hunting is the latest boundary-pushing Korean action film from director Hyun Sung Kim, but is it any good? I'm going to answer that question using my EASE review system, EASE standing for Effort, Audacity, Stimulation, and Execution. But before I do that, I would love for you to subscribe to Cinematech so you don't miss out on any other great film content. Now before we get into my bloody review, what is Project Wolf Hunting all about? But don't worry, there aren't going to be any spoilers, I wouldn't do that to you. Project Wolf Hunting is essentially a good guy versus bad guy movie with a couple of interesting caveats. The basic premise for the film is ridiculous. Essentially, a bunch of people, a bunch of criminals are caught in the Philippines and they must be extradited back to Korea. And obviously, the best way of doing that is by putting all of those criminals on a slow-moving cargo container and shipping them across the ocean to Korea. Eventually, the convicts are able to escape, and what follows is a bloodbath, a literal blood bath. I have not seen so much blood in my entire life. There's also a subplot that simmers under the surface and then erupts into the main narrative, but I'm not going to tell you about that because I don't really need to review this film, and also I might as well leave you with a little bit of a surprise. And that's actually a good spot to transition over to talking about the effort put into this film, because the effort is singular. The effort is in the blood and the gore and pretty much nothing else. The story, as you may have been able to guess from my plot synopsis, doesn't have a lot of effort put into it. It is a flimsy setup that is essentially just used to get these people into a singular place so that we can watch them murder each other. There isn't a lot of character development at work here either, which I kind of understand because there are a fair number of characters in this film, except that they are all essentially just cannon fodder, so we never really learn anything about them. But I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more when we get further into this review. For now, let's keep our sights on the blood and gore, because that is absolutely where all of the effort of this film was placed. First of all, I have to give a giant shout out to this film for using practical effects. I personally did not pick out a CGI blood splatter at all in this film. It was all practical from what I can tell, and considering the amount of blood and gore in this film, that is such a welcome surprise. I saw Project Wolf Hunting at the Toronto International Film Festival, and I also saw a number of other Korean films like Hunt and Man of Reason, and a lot of these other films, these action-based films, were using CGI blood and gore, which just doesn't look as good. So props to the filmmakers of Project Wolf Hunting for actually sticking to the original way that we used to do things. Practical effects. They just look better. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier in the review, but my goodness, Project Wolf Hunting has probably the most practical blood effects that I've ever seen in a film. It doesn't really get to the level, the height of something like The Shining or the Evil Dead remake. There's not like blood coming out of an elevator or anything like that, but just the amount of death in this film and the way that those deaths are shown, are created, are executed, it's very, very bloody. We're talking like 30 plus people getting killed, and it's all being done in an extremely gruesome way. So from an effort standpoint, the visual effects team on this film gets a gold star. They get 2 gold stars. They get multiple gold stars. And in terms of effort, I will also give a bit of credit to the cast of this film. They are not given much to work with. As I said, this is a very thin story with virtually no character development, but some of the people in the film do their best to differentiate their characters from the rest of the cannon fodder. A special shout out to Seong-guk. I really hope I'm pronouncing that name properly, because I think that's the only reason why some of you are watching this video. He, from what I understand, is a K-drama star. This is a villain turn for him, and my goodness, he does really well as one of the main bad guys in this film. He is evil. He is genuinely evil. I actually wouldn't mind a prequel film to this where we find out more about his backstory, because I feel like he's gotten up to all kinds of bad things in the past. I'd see that. I'd watch that. Comment below if you want to see that kind of movie. I bet you do. And now that I'm talking about Seong-guk, why don't we transition over to talking about the audacity of this film, because I think what he does in this film does speak to the film's audacious nature. I've already mentioned all of the blood and all of the gore, and I will be coming back to that in a bit, but when it comes to the performance of Seong-guk here, this could potentially be the kind of role or performance that tarnishes him that makes him not really that goody two-shoes, bright-eyed type actor that would be appropriate for playing like a love interest in a K-drama or really any kind of drama all around the world. And I do have to give him props for putting his career kind of on the line by making this film. So from an audacity standpoint, he is the most audacious part of this film, aside from all of the blood and gore. If we shift then to thinking about this film in terms of the business side of the film industry, I would also say that there is some audacity going on here, and once again, that has to do with the blood and the gore. I don't know if this film can be released theatrically in the United States with anything less than an NC-17 rating, and that is purely because of the practical blood and gore effects. Now, obviously this is a Korean film, they're probably not so interested in the American box office. Likely this film will be released straight to VOD and skip theaters entirely, but that is a bit of a market that they're missing out on. I will also say that I think the amount of blood and gore that ends up in this film isolates it from a larger horror community, because I don't know if the Conjuring crowd are going to show up for a movie like this because it is so much more over the top in terms of, once again, the blood and the gore. Drink every time I say blood and gore. I'm kidding, please do not hurt yourself. Beyond that, there's nothing else I can say about the audacity of this film. It has put so many of its chips into the blood and gore pot that it lives and dies off of it. And that, in and of itself, is a pretty audacious thing to do. So now let's move on to stimulation. What did this film make me feel? And as you may have guessed from what I've said already, a lot of what this film is trying to make you feel, trying to make me feel, has to do with the blood and gore. So it's obviously going for thrills and it's obviously going for disgust. And I will say, there are some points in this film where I felt pretty disgusted. I was also sort of awestruck with the amount of violence that was being put in front of my face at one time. This film is basically all violence. It starts at a 10 and ends at a 10. You never really stop with the violence. So if you're the kind of person who gets off on this kind of movie, you're probably gonna get pregnant after watching it. But once again, because the chief concern of this film is the blood and the gore, I wasn't allowed to feel anything else while watching it. There were no tears shed, there were no laughs coming out of my mouth. If there were, it was nervous laughter because of all of the ridiculous violence I was witnessing. So I think the best way of describing if this film will provide you with any kind of stimulation is that you will either find joy in the violence or you will find no joy at all, because there's just nothing else there. So now let's move on to execution, the most important section, because it is here where I talk about how all of these different elements fuse together to making an entertaining film, a good film, a great film, or a not great film. And to do that with Project Wolf Hunting, I must once again talk about the blood and the gore. But let's talk about it in two different ways. One, in the way that the blood and gore was actually executed, and two, how the blood and gore fit into the entirety of the film. As I mentioned in the effort section, a lot of hard work was put into the practical effects in this movie. The blood and the gore looks fantastic. I truly have not seen anything like it. The issue though, and this goes to how the blood and gore fits into the film, is that the film is at a 10 the entire time. There is no let up. There is no slow build. You are just only watching the most depraved violence from the get-go. And the effect that had on me was that after the first couple of kills, I found myself becoming numb to the violence that was actually happening in front of my eyes. Coupled with the fact that I didn't know anything about the characters, knew nothing about their backstory, and didn't care about them in the slightest, once they all started dying, I just didn't care. So very early on in the film, maybe 15, 20, 25 minutes into this nearly 2-hour long film, I was waiting for it to end because there was just nothing else going on. It was just violence, and it was just people that I didn't care about getting torn to shreds in all kinds of inventive ways. And there's only so much inventiveness you can add in to a truly bloody and gory film before it all just feels like mush. I will try to give the film a little bit of credit in this regard because it does change things up a little bit about halfway through. Remember that subplot I was talking about that I didn't want to tell you anything about? Well, a thing happens and then there's more death and gore and stuff, but it's being done in a slightly different way. I guess that counts as the film ramping up a little bit and trying to crescendo, but once again, after you've already watched 15 to 20 people get brutally murdered in a movie, what does it matter if you then get to see like someone get punched so hard that you see their ribs through their chest, or have someone's arm get ripped off and then have that person get beaten up with that arm, right? So one of the big issues with this film is that there is no ramp. You are just at a 10 out of 10 for violence the entire time, and it becomes exhausting. When talking about the execution in Project Wolf Hunting, we must also talk about the plot, or rather the lack of a plot. There were a few bare moments in this film where we get a little bit of plot, a little bit of narrative to help tie this all together, but for the most part, it's all sequel bait. So a lot of this time, this bare minimum amount of time where we could have been learning about the backstories of some of the key characters, was just being used to set up a sequel which we may never get. So that just felt like a waste. And considering the way that the first Project Wolf Hunting turned out, I'm not that excited to see a part 2. In short, this movie is for the gore fanatics and for the Seo and Guk stans, and everyone else would probably be best served by staying away. But tell me, have you seen Project Wolf Hunting and what did you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you're looking for something to watch that is not Project Wolf Hunting, well, why don't you try this video that I have linked over here to the right? I'm sure it's a good one.